Webflow has great filters like brightness, contrast, and hue. Now let's build daily interaction number 22. Hey, what's up everyone? John with WebDev for you, and welcome to the Daily Interaction series, where every weekday we build a new interaction or animation in Webflow. Today we're going to be building a menu trigger animation on hover. So here when I hover over this menu trigger, we see it has this nice animation to it. So this can be a bit more exciting than just having like an icon for the menu trigger. With this you can add a bit of animation to it. So this is what we will be creating. We're also going to apply this effect as an on-click animation. So when the user clicks, it turns into this icon. And when they click again, it goes to this one. And we're going to have like a panel reveal effect just to showcase how it would look with a menu. This button here is a bit larger, but we are going to make it so that we can scale it smaller as well if we'd like. So this is what we will be building today. To view more daily interactions and premium content, visit webdevforyou.com. Also be sure to subscribe below to receive a notification every time there is a new daily interaction. Okay, so here I have a blank Webflow project, and we'll start with the daily interaction class naming convention. So it's d-the daily interaction number, so today is 22. And then the element. So every element on this site will have a d-22 in front of it, and this is for consistency purposes and so that we know we're working with daily interaction number 22. Okay, and the first thing I'll do here is add a section. So I'll add an element, I'll add a section, I'll give it the class name d-22 section, and for the height I'll set it to 100 VH. So it spans the full height of the viewport, and it will be the full width as well. Then I'll scroll down to background. I'll set the background color to black, and I'll scroll up to display setting, set the display setting to flex, justify center, and align center. So anything I place within this section will be in the center. So the next thing I'm going to do is add a div block. First we're going to build out all the elements for the menu trigger, and then we're going to add the interaction. So here I'll add an element, I'll add a div block, and I'll give it the class name d-22 trigger wrapper. So all the elements of the menu trigger are going to go inside of this wrapper, and I'm putting it inside of a wrapper so that later we can resize the button or move it anywhere we'd like on the website. Okay, and for this I'm going to give it a width and height of 100 pixels by 100 pixels. So it's going to be fairly large initially, but we can scale it later. And I'm also going to set the position to relative because we are going to place absolute position divs inside of this wrapper. And I want those divs to be relative to this trigger wrapper and not relative to some other parent element. So by setting it to relative, anything inside of it will be relative to it. All right, looks good. And that's all I have to do there is set a width and height and set the position to relative. Looks good. So the next thing I'll do is if we go to the demo, we can see we have this square that rotates. So I want to add a square with a border. So to do that, I'm going to, here I'll go to the navigator and we'll look at the structure of the site. So in the trigger wrapper, I'm going to add an element. I'm going to add a div block, and I'll give it the class name d-22 trigger square. Okay, and for this, I'm going to set it to a position of absolute and full. So this will fill the entire parent element, which is the trigger wrapper. And because the trigger wrapper has a position of relative, the trigger square is just filling that entire wrapper, so it's inside of it. All right, so we have it at absolute and full. And also by having it at a position of absolute, it allows us to rotate the square inside of the wrapper without moving other elements. Okay, so I want to add a border to this trigger square. So I'm going to go down to borders, right here to border. I'm going to give it a solid border, And I'm going to set the width to 3 pixels, and I'll set the color to white. Okay, so there we have the trigger square with the border. And now I want to add the menu lines. So in the demo, we have 3 lines and looks good. So we have the white lines and we have the pink lines. So to add those, what I'll do is in the trigger wrapper, so yeah, I'll select trigger wrapper in the navigator. I'll add an element. I'll add a div block, and I'll give it the class name D-22 trigger lines wrapper. Okay, so we're going to place the lines inside of here. I'll give it a position of absolute and full, and then I'll also set the display setting to flex. I'll set it to vertical because we want the lines stacked on top of each other, and I'll set it to justify center and align center. Okay, that looks good. Yeah, so that's all we have to do there. And now we can add the lines inside of this wrapper. Oh, the other thing we want to do is set an overflow of hidden. And this way, when the lines move out of this wrapper, we don't see the lines. So if we look at the demo, when we hover, those lines are moving out of the wrapper and we don't see them. So we want to set an overflow of hidden to the trigger lines wrapper. Okay, yeah, so it's right here, overflow hidden. So now I'll add those 3 lines inside of this trigger lines wrapper. So I'll add an element, I'll add a div block, and I'll give it the class name D-22. We'll just say line or trigger line. Okay, and for this I'll give it a width of 50 pixels and a height of 2 pixels. Okay, and I'll set the background color to white. Okay, so there we have the line. Now I'll go into the navigator, and for the trigger lines wrapper, I'll just copy the trigger line, select the trigger lines wrapper, and paste 2 more times so we have 3 lines. Then I'll select the trigger line, go into styles, and give it a top and bottom margin of 5. So I'll click, hold and drag, and oops, not like that, yeah, click. I'll hold down Alt to adjust the bottom and the top margin, and I'll give it a margin of, let's say, 5 pixels to the bottom and the top, and there we go. So we have the white border and we have the lines here. Okay, so now we want to add the pink lines as well. So to do that, I'll go into the navigator, I'll copy the trigger lines wrapper, so I'll hit Command C to copy, and then Command V to paste. So now we have a second set of lines. So it looks like there's only one set, and that's because the lines wrapper is set to position absolute. So they're actually stacked on top of each other. So we have the first set and we have the second set, and they're just stacked on top of each other. So for this, to turn the lines to the pink color, I'll select the first line in the second set. I'll go to styles, and I'll give it a combo class of second, so we can apply individual properties to this line. So I'll scroll down to background. I'll give it a background color of magenta, and if we look, this line is pink. The white line is still behind it. They're just stacked on top of each other, so we don't see that line behind it. So now what I'll do for the second and third line, I'll select it here in the navigator. I'll go into the selector, and I'll give it the combo class of second, and it'll automatically make it pink because the combo class second has the pink background. Then I'll select the third line, and I'll give it a combo class of second. All right, so yeah, that's all we need to do. We have all the elements we need to create the interaction. So here I'll go into the navigator, and I want this interaction to occur. So let me collapse these here. So we have, yeah, the trigger wrapper, we have the trigger square inside of the wrapper, and we have the trigger lines wrapper with the white lines and the trigger lines wrapper with the pink lines. So I want this interaction to occur when we hover over the trigger wrapper. So I'll select it here. I'll go into interactions. Here where it says element trigger, I'll click the plus, and I want it to occur on mouse hover. So here I'll select mouse hover, and on hover, we're going to start an animation, and I'm going to add a new timed animation. So I'll click the plus here, and I'll name this D-22 mouse in. So what happens when we hover over the trigger wrapper? And let's look at how we want to construct this interaction. So initially, yeah, if we look at the demo, initially we don't see the pink lines. So the pink lines are moved to the left, and yeah, they're just moved to the left. And when I hover, the white lines move to the right and the pink lines come in. The square rotates 45 degrees and it also changes color. So in the interaction, we initially want the pink lines all the way to the left. So in the navigator, I'll select the second set of lines, and I'll select the first line here, trigger the first trigger line, go into interactions. I'll add a new timed action. I'll say move, and I'll move it on the x-axis so it moves horizontally. I'll move it to the left, and I'm going to move it negative 200%. Okay, so yeah, 200% works well because it moves it completely out of view. So the width of the line is 50 pixels, so it moves it over like 100 pixels or 200%. And by adding a percentage, it makes it easier for us to scale the trigger this trigger button later, so we can make it smaller. If I were to enter in a pixel value and I tried to make it smaller, it wouldn't work as well. So by setting a percentage, we can later work with the size of the trigger wrapper. Okay, so negative 200% on the X, and I'm going to set it as the initial state, so it starts initially on the left. Okay, so I'll click here next to timing, so set as initial state. And if I preview, we notice we can't see that first pink line. So now I want to apply those same properties to the second and third line. So here I'll right click on trigger line, select duplicate, right click, change target, go into the navigator, and I'll select the second line. Okay, so it applies it to the second line, then I'll right click, duplicate, right click, change target, and I'll apply it to the third line. Okay, so now all the pink lines are moved to the left, and I'll just click, hold, and drag each one on top of the first, or on top of the previous one, so that they can all become the initial state. So if I click on all of these, we notice that next to timing, they're all set as the initial state. So now if I preview, we only see the white lines because they were behind the pink lines. Okay, so the next thing I want to do, if I go to the demo, so the square rotates and changes color. So let's do that. So in the navigator, I'll select the trigger square, go into interactions, and I'll say rotate, and I'm going to rotate it on the Z axis. So it rotates clockwise and not on the X, so it wouldn't rotate like this, or on the Y, it would rotate like this. I just want to rotate it clockwise. So on the Z axis, I'll say 45 degrees. I'll give it an easing of ease out expo. Oh no, ease out. For this, I did ease out circ. It adds a nice animation to it. And for the duration, I'll say 1 second. Okay, so now if I preview and I hover, that square rotates with an easing of ease out circ and a duration of 1 second. Okay, and I also want to change the color, so I'll add another timed action, and I'll say border color. All right, so we'll change the border color, and I'll change it to magenta. And for this, I'll add an easing of ease out expo, and a duration of 0.5 is okay. And I'll click, hold, and drag on top of the rotate timed action so they start at the same time. Okay, and I'll preview, and there we go. It rotates and turns pink. Okay, so the next thing I want to do is have the 3 white lines move to the right and bring in the 3 pink lines. So in the navigator, I'll select the first set of lines, and I'll select the first line here, the trigger line, which is the white line, go into interactions, and I'll say move, and I'll move it horizontally on the x-axis 200%, so it moves to the right instead of to the left. Negative would move it to the left, positive to the right, so I added 200%, and then it'll move that line to the right. All right, so I want to do that for all of them. I want to add an easing of ease out expo, and a duration of 0.5 is okay. So you can play with the easing. These are just personal preferences of how I like the animation to occur, but yeah, you can work with the different easing here as well. They have many options for the easing. All right, so for this, I'll right click, duplicate, right click, change target, go into the navigator, and I'll select the second line. Okay, and again, right click, duplicate, right click, change target, and I'll select the third line. Okay, and I'll put them on top of each other, or actually I'm going to start it with the other timed actions, so all of these start together. And I'm going to add a delay to each one. So if we notice, actually, yeah, in the demo, it has a staggered effect. And to achieve that effect, we're just starting all the timed actions at the same time. And then for these lines, I'm going to add a delay. So here I'll add a delay to each line. And I like to start at the bottom, from the bottom to the top, because once you add a delay to the first element, Webflow will move it down within the timed actions. And because they all have the same class name, it would be a bit confusing to see which line is what. I know that they're in the order here, so line 1, 2, and 3. So for the first one, I'm going to add a delay of 0.1. This is going to be 0.2, and this is going to be 0.3. So for the last one here, I'll add a delay of 0.3. The second one will be 0.2, and the first one will be 0.1. So they all stay in the same position, and I've added a delay to all of them. So now if I preview and I hover, we see it has that staggered effect, and they're all moving to the right. All right, so the next thing I want to do is bring in the pink lines. So for this, I'll go into the navigator. I'll select the first pink line here in the second set of lines, go into into interactions. I'll say move, and I'll move it on the x-axis to 0%, so it goes back to its original position. All right, and then I'll add an easing of ease out expo, and a duration of 0.5 is okay. Then I'll right-click, duplicate, right-click, change target, select the second line, then I'll right-click, duplicate, right-click, change target, and I'll select the third line. Okay, so they all come back to the center, and then I'll start these lines with the other ones as well. So I'll click, hold, and drag, and place it on top of each previous timed action. And for this, the first pink line is going to have a delay of 0.3, so that's okay. This one's going to have a delay of 0.4 and 0.5. So I'll start at the bottom here. I'll give it a delay of 0.5, and this the second pink line, I'll say 0.4. So the last white line and the first pink line will start kind of at the same time, and it just makes for an interesting effect. All right, so in total, the entire interaction is 1 second. We have the square rotating and changing color. We have the white lines moving to the right in a staggered motion, and we have the pink lines coming in a staggered motion. So now I'll preview, I hover, and perfect. So let me do that again. The white lines move to the right and the pink lines come in. All right, looks good. So the last thing we need to do is add a hover out animation. So for this, I'll close this, and on hover out, we're going to start an animation. And I'm going to duplicate the mouse in because it has a lot of the properties that we need for the mouse out animation. So here I'll click on these 3 dots. I'll select duplicate, and I'll select D-22 mouse in 2. I'll click on it, and I'll rename it to D-22 mouse out. So for this, we don't need the initial states because we already applied that to the first timed action, or the hover in animation. So I'll just delete these initial states. And basically what we want to do here is just apply the reverse motion to each of these timed actions. And then we want to move the order of some of this as well. So for the trigger square, we're going to rotate it back to 0. So I'll just enter in 0. The border color, we're going to change it back to white. The white trigger lines, we're going to bring back to 0%, so it goes back to the center. So instead of 200%, we'll say 0%. Then the pink lines, we're going to move it negative 200%, so it goes back to the left. All right, negative 200% and negative 200%. So we do need to work. We do need to work with the delay of these lines because we want the pink lines to move out first and then the white lines to come in. So down here we have the pink lines. So for this, I'm just going to click and look at the designer so I know which line I'm selecting. So at the bottom here, we have the third pink line. So this is going to move this is going to have a delay of 0.3. So we're just reversing the delay for each. So the delay of the white lines is going to be applied to the pink, and the delay of the pink lines is going to be applied to the white. So for the third pink line, I'm going to add a delay of 0.3. And then, let's see, the second pink line is going to have a delay of 0.2. And the first pink line is going to have a delay of 0.1. So I think I did that right. So let me see. So 0.1. Yeah, so this is the white, the pink line, because I can see it's moved to the left here, and it has a value of negative 200%. And then the second line has a 0.2, and the third line is 0.3. Perfect. So now let's select the white lines. So the first white line is going to have a delay of 0.3. Then the second white line, so it has a value of 0%, and I can see it here in the designer. We're going to add a value of 0.4. And then the fifth white line, let's see if I can find it here. Here's the fifth white line. We know because it has a value of 0%, and I can see it in the designer. We're going to add a delay of 0.5. So if I look, there we have the pink line, so 1, 2, and 3. And then the white lines, we have 1, 2, and 3. Perfect. And I added a delay of 0.55, just 0.5 there. All right, so yeah, this might take a moment to play with. Just make sure you're selecting the right lines. So you can look at the designer and kind of see which line is which as you move down. So the lines on the left are the pink ones, and the lines here, the lines we can see, those are the white lines. So we just reversed the delay there. And that's it. So now if I preview and I hover, the white lines move to the right and the pink lines come in. When I hover off, the pink lines move out and the white lines come in. All right, so there we go. We have the interaction all set. And yeah, it looks good. So now let's do a few things. Let's do the same interaction on click and add kind of a full screen menu wrapper behind it so we can see how it would work if we decided to apply it to a menu. You could have it on hover, but I find that having it on click makes a bit more sense when the user clicks and then clicks again. So what I'll do here is I'll delete this mouse hover interaction, and then with the trigger wrapper selected, for the element trigger, I'll click the plus, select mouse click. On first click, we're going to start an animation. I'll select D-22 mouse in, and on second click, I'll start an animation and select the mouse out. So now I preview on first click, we have the first animation. On second click, we have the out animation. So what I can do here is in the section, let me set the section to relative. And then in the section, I'll add a div block. I'll set it to a position of fixed and full. So we have a full screen menu. And for the background, I'll set it to blue. And let me move the menu. Let me give it the class name D-22 menu wrapper. And I'll place this menu wrapper here at the top so the trigger is in front. So there we have the menu wrapper. Yeah, and that's all we need to do there. So I'll select the trigger wrapper. I'll go into interactions. On mouse click or tap, I'll select the first animation, and I'll select the menu wrapper so I can select it in the navigator. And I'm going to move it negative 100% on the X so it moves out of view. And I'll set it as the initial state so we don't see that menu initially. Then I'll say move it to 0%, and add an easing of ease out expo, and a duration of 0.5 is okay. And I'll start it with the other timed actions. So I'll click, hold, and drag to start it with the other ones. So now I'll preview. If I click, the menu comes in. And then on second click, on mouse out, the second click, we'll just select the menu wrapper here in the navigator or in the designer. I'll say move, and I'll move it back to negative 100%. And add an easing of ease out expo, and a duration of 0.5 is okay. Start it with the other ones and make sure that the delay is set to 0. So I'll preview, click, first click comes in, second click goes out. Looks pretty good, and I'll add a cursor to the trigger wrapper so the user knows to click. So I'll go into cursor, give it a pointer cursor, And so now when I hover, there's a pointer, click, the menu comes in, click again, the menu flies out. So now we can actually change the size of this trigger wrapper pretty easily. So I'll select the trigger wrapper, and let's make it, instead of 100 by 100, let's make it 50 by 50. And then the lines, so I'll select the first trigger line here in the first set, and because it doesn't have a combo class, it'll apply it to all the other lines as well. And here for the width, I'm going to say 25 pixels, so half of what it was. A height of 2 pixels is okay, and I'll just change the margin top and bottom to 2 pixels instead of 5, so we have a smaller menu trigger. And because we set the movement of the lines in a percentage, we will still have the same effect. So now I'll preview. If I click, looks good, perfect. It's just smaller, and I'll make the square, I'll make the border a bit smaller as well. So I'll say something like 2 pixels instead of 3. So it's a bit thinner, and there we go. We have a smaller menu trigger wrapper, and I can do something like the trigger wrapper. I'll set it to a position of absolute, move it in the top left, and then I'll just add some margin to the left and right. So maybe 40 from the left and 40 from the top. And we have our menu trigger here in the top left. I click, the menu comes in, I click again, the menu flies out. All right, looks good. So I just wanted to demonstrate that. I know I started off with the hover animation because I think it's nice when the user hovers and it occurs. And then the user can click as well to open the menu. That would be another interaction, to have it open the menu on click. Or you could have it so that when the user clicks, the animation occurs, and when the user clicks again, the animation plays in reverse. All right, looks good. So yeah, that's it for daily interaction number 22. I'm kind of clicking a lot here. But yeah, that's how we create a menu trigger animation on hover. Yeah, it looks good. If you have any questions about this, you can leave it in the comment section for this video, or in the forum section for this video as well, and I'd be happy to discuss or answer any questions. All right, looks good. So that is it for daily interaction number 22, the menu trigger animation on hover. To view more daily interactions and premium content, visit webdevforyou.com. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next daily interaction.